We had just went over earlier IP addresses and why they're important and how they're kind of viewed by threat intelligence, and kind of covered a couple of the more important items that we look at. What I want to do today is kind of begin our practical series and start talking about, especially in relation to IP addresses, some of the more practical lookups and things that we do. In this case, I really want to focus on identifying data centers, or at least getting hints towards whether something is a data center or not in the IP addresses that we look at. And so there's a couple of ways to do that. I'm going to cover a couple of the important tools that we use, how you can do it really quickly. There's some other things you can do when you have automation or some specific software or easy access tools set up in your environment. But I'm really going to approach this as if you don't have those, and really talk about things that are free and open and easily available for you, so that you could get familiar with this task whether you are currently working in a threat intelligence position or not, because this is indeed oriented towards Apprentice introductory level kind of understanding. So this is meant for folks who are brand new, who don't have a ton of understanding already and capability in this arena, and they really want to focus on and kind of expand their current understanding of how we look at IP addresses and how to look up information about IP addresses. Now, what you see in front of you is kind of an IP block list, which is generally used to stop attacks or stop things at a firewall level. What we're going to use it for today is to talk about whether we can employ that information with a few other tools to also identify whether an IP address belongs to a data center or not. And just to be clear, a data center is a cloud location or a physical location away from typically your business that has a bunch of servers, both hardware and virtualized, that run in there assigned to IP addresses that are used for all kinds of different things. We want to know when we see data center IP addresses, because it helps us understand and be able to identify them in traffic and understand where that traffic may or may not be sourced, and additionally help us understand behavior, because a data center IP address, for example, shouldn't be acting like a person, shouldn't be acting like it's coming out of a residential zone, interacting with forms, interacting with ads, opening up web pages, trying to input things into your website. Those kind of behaviors are very atypical for a residential IP or for an individual who's performing activity on an IP, but not for a data center that may have a bot or may have some kind of automation in play that we want to stop. So there's plenty of reasons. There's a couple of them on why we might want to just look at an IP address and go, that's a data center IP address, and then cast certain behaviors or expect certain behaviors because of that. So this right here, as I started with, is a block list, but it's very handy because, one, it stays updated. If you look here, this file was created on February, but its update list and time frame was on 19 March, which is today. It's when I'm actually recording this. This is supported by Firehol. It's one of their mini IP lists. And what it does is it gives you IP ranges and sets for different locations that they know for sure are a data center. And you're going to notice really quick that there's a slash following a lot of zeros in many cases. These indicate large clusters, or what we call CIDR or net range. And there are varying sizes. The smaller the number, the bigger, and for the bigger amount of IPs that are there. For example, this /16 kind of approximates 65,536 IP addresses, so it's kind of a large chunk. As you grow up a little bit, this /18, for example, it's not as big. Thankfully, it's 16,384, but still tremendously sized. And then if I jump, I don't know, 6 more to /24 here, which is a very common range of IPs we might look at, now you're looking at 256. And you'll notice that they're kind of multiples. And indeed, as you go to 25, it halves, and 26, it halves again, and so forth, until you get all the way up to 32, where you have basically an individual IP. Those are rarely seen, and you won't see a lot of these attributed to data centers. You'll see everything from a /8 up to maybe a /24. Sometimes a little bigger, like here's a /29. But for the most part, they'll stay statically. And we're going to basically use this topically. Normally, you would pull this down locally, put it in a database, expand out all those IPs so you could do a one-to-one very quick search. We're not going to do that today because, one, it's beyond this introductory kind of video, and two, it's something that we don't necessarily need to do for today's kind of foray into things. It's more of a junior and senior kind of task, and I will cover this in more detail on how to do this and how to make a localized database that you could query using script, because I think that's a very useful tool for you to have in your arsenal. But just know that we're going to use this to get some very beginning kind of hints and signals towards whether something's a data center or not. The second tool I'm going to introduce here is RIPE. This is the RIPE Network Coordination Center. If you're not familiar with it, it's one of the root servers that handle the domain name system or the DNS for the internet. We're going to ask it a lot of information about routes and IP addresses and get some hints again towards whether something is a data center or an IP is sitting in a data center or it's not. The third tool we're going to use today is IP2 location. Very handy. This is their demo. They give you the ability to look up 50 IP addresses every day. I've kind of preloaded one already just for simplicity's sake. And we're going to go through this and see what kind of information it tells us and whether we can use that in coordination with the other two tools on whether we can determine something is sitting in a data center or not. And thirdly, our old friend ipinfo, which I've already introduced. If you listen to the video that did the introduction to IP addresses from kind of a threat intelligence eye view, you'll have seen this one. We're going to do it again. This is a slightly different view, which you might notice. And then lastly, our other old friend, Hurricane Electric, which is a looking glass that additionally just gives us capability to look up and get information on IP addresses. So let's not talk more. Let's get down to it. So we start here again normally, and I'm going to say this over and over, we would have expanded this out and put this into something local that we could use. If I can hit the right buttons here, I'll just click it, make it simple. We can kind of go on from there. That you can utilize it to do one-to-one lookups, but for now we're going to use it casually in the browser as a starting point. Now I'm going to start with this one IP address that I've already entered. It's this one right here. I'll go ahead and copy that. And we're going to check it out here. If you do a straight up search, you're going to find it's not there. There's thousands of entries here, so that's not surprising. One of the things I like to do when I'm trying to do a quick search is I'll look to see if it's even in there in the first 2 octets or 1 octet. In this case, it's not. So that's one signal that this is not a data center, but it's not complete, obviously. We'll put it in here so to make sure we have it. We'll do our search. And we'll see what RIPE tells us. Now, RIPE is looking at the routing information, which is very important. First thing I'll notice is it tells us it's part of a /19, which we didn't mention earlier, but a /19 has about 8,192 IP addresses in it or so. Kind of gives me a sense on who it is. This is Activate Me from AAP, Australian Private Networks. More likely to be a VPN or a proxy than it is actually to be a data center, but you never know. And there's a couple things to pull from this. One is this routing is very interesting to notice. It tells us that this is bundled, and that's further reinforced by this right here, where you see that it's allocated portable. There's 3 kind of statuses that I keep and pay attention to when I'm looking at these. They're allocated portable, and I'm going to really butcher this, but assigned, basically provider aggregatable, and then assigned provider independent. And you'll see those, they'll be assigned PA and assigned PI. Now, assigned provider aggregatable, boy, I have a tough time with that phrasing, but that's a group of IP addresses that have been assigned to an ISP and can be bundled into a single route advisement to kind of improve routing. It just means that they can roll up smaller /24s, 28s, those kind of things into bigger ones like the /19 or a /18 to make it easier to route for those IP addresses. And don't worry if you're not catching what routing is and things like that. We're going to have a longer talk, and you'll get in there in the lectures and in some of the practicals on how to look at the DNS and how things are routed on the internet. Because it's not as simple as just typing in the name that you know. There's actually a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and we find that all very important from a cyber security or threat intelligence perspective. But just to touch on them, 3 statuses. In this case, the allocated portable means that that IP can be reassigned. It can be basically anything the owner of that IP wants it to be. Now, none of this tells us, hey, this is a data center. Though it is kind of interesting. We see this hint here with pool. Some words are very straightforward, but it's not saying data center. And that's okay. That's not unexpected. I've already ran this one as well. And you can see here, it tells us again, here's your IP, it's in Australia, it's in Queensland, that's all awesome. It gives us the ISP name. And then it does something really useful. It tells us, hey, this is NetSpeed-wise a broadband cable fiber mobile connection. And that's important, and it's further reinforced by the fact that this is an ISP. So what I'm not seeing is data center. And often this is exactly where you're going to see it. And if I continue to look through my other resources, it tells me again, private networks, that it's an ISP. You kind of get down here, the network speeds, and they're all kind of reinforcing that this is likely, again, a ISP versus a data center. And that may not be clear, but let's do another IP address and maybe that'll even become more blunt, because some of these are very straightforward data centers, because they'll tell you outright they're a data center. Let's do this 62 address. I know I didn't start with the block list, but that's fine. So you get one here. Here's that assigned PA like I was talking about. Again, assigned provider aggregatable. Aggregatable is not an easy word for me. So, and it's in a /26. You'll see a couple of really good information here. I did not cover all these panels, mainly because there's a lot in these panels, and I really want to focus on just talking about the data center piece, but I will talk about a couple things. This is a /19, and because it's a PA, assigned PA, it's probably bundled, and that's further reinforced by the fact that there's a bunch of /4s right here that are all rolled up inside of this /19. So that's kind of helpful. And again, a /19, 8,000 or so IP addresses all rolled into one. It's not relevant, but this right here tells me that this is private internet access, which happens to be a VPN provider. This right here, though, this colo call, this is a very common phrasing that you'll see assigned to co-located facilities, aka data centers. So that's a big hint right there that that's a data center. I could look up this AS and get even more information. So let's take a click on that. And this AS gives me some information, and it tells me that, boom, this is indeed a internet data center sitting in Kiev, Ukraine. So that's a good sign. Let me back up here and see what we've got here. I always like to break, okay, there's our /19, 62.149, ... and then /19. So that's our routing. If you go back here and take a look, it told us that the routing was indeed, no, we're still in the AS. Let's back up one more. Can never go right, never go wrong. There's our routing again. So that is indeed a data center, at least on the surface. I'd definitely flag it as likely or suspicious as one, and then I'd go out and do further checks to refine that. Let's check it out here. This also says Ukraine, so that's consistent. It's telling us it's a company. It's got a T1 speed, which is very typical for a data center. And indeed, it is registering here as a data center web hosting transit, and again, reinforced again by the AS itself. We could check the other two, but it's really not necessary. It's good to say that that particular IP address, that 62 address, is indeed a data center. Let's do another one. Let me pull one over here. This is a 162. So let's start here. Not identical, no surprise. And again, you would ordinarily look this up. Locally, you wouldn't do it here from the browser, but I'm being lazy, and that's what we're doing. Let's look up this 162 here, see what we can get from RIPE. And RIPE tells us, okay, it's got more or less one, but not an exact match. This says AT&T. Okay, that's interesting. It's a /12, which is gigantic. Not even going to bother breaking that out. Just know that it's thousands, many, many thousands. And then it has only one prefix. So when you see things like this, when it's rolled into something along this nature, and then of course you see this Austin, Texas piece, this tends to point to either mobile or something akin to it. This is probably a mobile AT&T IP address. I have not looked these up, so I don't know. It is Texas. Yeah, it's DSL broadband mobile. And it is a fixed line for an ISP. So this is not likely to be a data center. There's no easy hints for it. In fact, I would suspect this is easily a mobile one or something for someone's home or residential. Let's see what Hurricane Electric has for us here. It's going to again tell us that it's, yeah, this is a residential IP or a mobile IP, more likely a residential one. So let's do another one. Let's grab a 188. We'll just continue to dance up the IP ranges. Let's see what we got here. Let's do exacts. So we got no exact. Let's roll back. Oh, we got a match here. Okay, so 188.241, but it's .112. I don't know if you saw that because I did it pretty quickly, but that's a .80. So you don't have a necessarily exact match, and that's fine, and that's not unexpected. And this is a /21, which has a decent number of IPs in it, but not anything that like crazy. Let's pull it up here and see what we got. So one thing we can do when you have this kind of match, let's pull it back up again. This is 112.0./21. Over here, we're being routed for a /24 in kind of a different range. No route-specific items. This is in China. Oh, it's M247 limited. Also assigned PA. Not a lot of other good info here. We could look up this route and kind of dig a little bit more. Okay, is visible. There's the route. Shared infrastructure. All right, infrastructure. When you see this word in the description, the word infrastructure is kind of like colo or call. It tends to point towards a data center, though it's not exact, obviously. Let's see what our IP2 location says for us. Did it work? Nope. Let's click it again. There we go. Of course, China, Shandong company. Got a T1 line. Okay. Oh, we do have a data center more likely than not. That's a good sign. Oh, and it's a VPN to boot. It's pretty awesome. If you're wondering what happens when you click these, it tries to sell you stuff. That's why I don't have it on. So I'd say it's a data center with proxy and a VPN. This is interesting. Let's see. Let's carry our IP over and see what this guy says. Got a /24. Similar network speeds. No standouts. Let's see what we got here from Hurricane Electric. And we're getting this again. There's our /24, and there's no DNS, which is kind of be expected. Let's look at the whole route. No DNS. Yeah, that's a block of, more likely than not, just data center IPs. Though this here tends to point to it being a VPN, so it's probably being used by something. Did we have an RDNS? No, we did not. So at this point, if I was trying to chase it down and see what kind of VPN or what service it was, I'd go look at the RDNS and other information about it, and I could probably pinpoint what exact IP address is using it. So again, highly likely to be a data center. You got hints here, further reinforced by, of course, the flat-out usage requirements. You could go and take that. Let's do two more here. Let's do another one. I'll jump down a little bit and do a 185. So let me see if I can click successfully here. And again, these are rule of thumbs, so we're doing fast analysis. We're not doing anything detailed. The idea is to give you an introduction, kind of give you some scope to this. So 185 is there as a beginning part of the octets, but there's no 230s. We jump from 224 to 239. But this list is not necessarily 100%. It just covers the majority of cases. That's why we're looking at multiple resources, plus we're getting verification. Oh, we're back to our old friend here, M247. So we're still in the same area. So if it was M247, there's a good chance that this is also a data center. Let's see what we can find out here. Let's look at this route. Yeah, see there's the infrastructure. I'd almost guarantee, especially because of how adjacent this IP address is, that it is also in the data center. And indeed, we're correct. There it is, the data center again. Got a T1 line. There's no point checking the other ones. Let's do one a little farther away from it. So I'm going to do this 136 IP address. Let's see. So we don't have any exact matches, and that's fine. Let's break down. Nothing there. No surprise. Let's jump into RIPE here. Let's see what we got. And there's other ones. Besides RIPE, there's ARIN. There's a couple of these. There's 13 to be specific, and you could indeed kind of chase them down and check them out in each one. But RIPE has the most friendly kind of interface that will let you basically interrogate all day long. They do have a new UI, but it does change the view a little bit. So for simplicity's sake, I'm keeping you here. Google Fiber, probably not a data center, but you never know. It's in a /20. Down here, we get not much. Yep, Google Fiber. Google Fiber, not much. Let's see what we got here. ISP in Austin, broadband. We got here. And fiber. So this is probably home, residential, or business, and it's a fiber, not a data center. So as you can see, it's not horribly difficult to do this, but leveraging the right list, well, shucks, that didn't work like I wanted. Leveraging the right list and a few tools, you can kind of get a really quick sense on whether something as an IP is coming out of a data center. This is one of several tasks that you may do as an apprentice to kind of do basic identification of information around IP addresses. And then you would take this beginning understanding, preliminary test, if you will. A lot of times, if you think of it in a medical setting, you go in, they'll do a preliminary test for something, then they'll do a more detailed test. This is indeed a preliminary test that a beginner would be tasked with. Like, go check this out, let me know if that's a data center IP. And then if it is, it would be passed back up, and someone more senior, junior, or senior, or principal would come in and actually do more detailed work to understand the context of that IP address inside the other context of an attack or activity or behavior and so on. So it has a lot of a lot of facets that are really important to its use. So this is kind of the end. Hopefully you learned something from this, and there will be more videos talking about some of the beginner and more advanced practical tasks for cyber threat intelligence. Thank you for your time. I hope to see you in a future video.